So I'd really like to introduce to you our natural resource specialist, as well as director of the Living with Fire program, Dr. Christina Restaino. I'm really excited for this presentation. Oh, welcome.
Hello. Is it my time to share my screen, Jamie?
It is your time.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. I am going to talk today about giving some tips to you all about what you can do to retrofit your home to make it safer if an active big fire is approaching your home. And so I will preface this by saying that I have really gotten a lot of support and information from folks that are experts in this particular subject. And I may not be able to answer every question that folks have, but I can certainly find the answer if I cannot answer it today. But I do believe that there's still a lot of great tips and information in here. There's a lot of information that I have to go through. Want to let everyone know up front, these slides will be emailed to everybody that was signed up for the workshop today. So you will be getting the slides in your email, and then in a few weeks, we'll actually have the whole talk recorded and posted on our YouTube channel. And when that is available, we will email all of you with that so that you can rewatch the talk, show it to your neighbors, your family members, etc. So before I get started here, I just wanted to ask a quick poll, if you could launch that, Megan, of what the barriers are that you perceive to retrofitting your home. So okay, I'm going to wait for you to launch that, Megan. And all right, so I've asked again, what are the barriers that you have to implementing home hardening or home retrofitting projects? Do you like the way your house currently looks, so you don't want to change it? You don't own your home is in Tahoe or somewhere else that is a second home, and it's not your priority. So that could be anywhere, not just Tahoe, but just somewhere where you have a home that's not your main priority. It's too expensive, you don't have time, or you don't know what to do. And so we'll give it a couple minutes here. Just curious for us to know kind of what's preventing folks from implementing some of these things themselves already. So it looks like it's slowed down. I'm going to click end polling here, Megan.
Okay.
And then I'm going to share the results. So we see a lot of people, half of the people today don't know what to do. So hopefully we'll be able to fill that knowledge gap today to tell people what to do. And then 28% say it's too expensive or they don't have time, which completely makes sense. We're going to go through a lot of low cost options where you don't, for example, you don't have to tear out your whole deck. There's some options that you can do to kind of reinforce your current deck or things like that. So let's get going on the actual talk here. All right, so just to provide a little bit of context, and I don't quite know why this isn't advancing. There's always some sort of technical issue. So I'm going to reshare and see if that'll work a little better. All right. Okay, so what have we learned in communities where wildfires have burned? Well, we've learned that often in the neighborhoods where the most homes are lost, flames are spreading from home to home as embers from one structure land on the other. So the homes themselves and the materials around the homes are actually causing a lot of the fire spread through the communities. So some of the factors of home loss that we have seen and have been documented after wildfires is there's been a lack of defensible space around the home. There's been wood piled near homes, or that could be plywood, construction materials, or actual firewood that you use in the house. Dry decks, so decks that have combustible items on them attached to the home, or the decks themselves are very dry. And then the construction materials that the homes are made out of themselves, which we are going to address today. So just to give a little bit of context of how homes ignite. So there are 3 different types of exposures that can lead to ignition. On the top left, we have an example here of radiant heat, where just flaming material or structures nearby a home can heat the home up to a high enough level that it will combust without direct flame contact. That is a great reason why it's so important to have good defensible space. Direct flame contact, again, if a burning tree or shrub or other structure is right next to your house and extends flames directly to your home, it can catch on fire. And then, of course, one of the most common ways is through wind-blown embers. So embers are tiny pieces of flaming material that are flying through the air when a fire is nearby, coming from trees or other homes or shrubs or anything that can cause little pieces of burning material to blow towards your home. Now, studies have shown 60 to 90% of homes that are lost in a wildfire are ignited through wind-blown embers. So what I would like to do today is to give you a lot of recommendations on how you can make your house less vulnerable to embers. And so the way that we suggest doing this, first and foremost, is to think at the big picture about a coupled approach. To make your home safe for wildfire, you need to think about creating defensible space and hardening your home to possible ignitions from both embers or flames. Now, last week, Jamie and Megan, who both work for Living with Fire, gave a great presentation about how to create the defensible space around your home. That presentation will be available soon on our YouTube channel, and we'll be sure to send that out to this group as well. But today I won't be going into how to do defensible space around your home. Before I leave this slide, though, I will say I will come back over and over and over again to the non-combustible zone that we recommend all the way around your house. This is the 0 to 5 feet immediately surrounding your home that we recommend is your non-combustible zone, where there's no combustible materials in that area at all. And so I will bring that up again throughout this whole talk. So today I am going to go over the following home components and our recommendations to make them more secure for wildfire. I'm going to go through roofs and your rain gutters, eaves, vents, siding, skylights, windows, decks, garages, chimneys, and your fences. So you will leave this with a bit of information about each of these different components of your home. So before I go into more of that, I want to launch another poll and ask you right now, what do you think is the most vulnerable part of your home? So if you can go ahead and launch that poll, Megan. Okay, do you think it's the roof? Do you think it's your windows, your deck, your vents, or your siding? It's so fun to watch the answers change over time here as people start to populate it. Right now, the vents are in the lead. Roof is not far behind. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end this poll. I'm going to share the results. And as you can see, vents wins. A lot of people think that vents are the most vulnerable part of their home, and then roofs, and then their deck and their sidings, and then the windows. Good news, vents are one of the cheapest ways that you can make an improvement to your home, which I will show you how to do pretty soon here. Okay, so moving on. For some reason, when I do the polls, I can't advance my slides anymore, so I have to re-share. I'm not quite sure why it's doing that, but we'll just get back to it. Okay. All right, so starting with the roof, as a lot of you thought, your roof is a very vulnerable part of your home. The number one thing that folks recommend is that you replace a wood shake or shingle roof with a Class A roof. I'll explain a little bit more about that on the next slide. A huge thing is to consistently remove accumulated debris from your roof. So you should be doing this a few times in the summer, and especially right now in the fall. We are getting to what's traditionally when the fire season really starts to ramp up, even though we've already had a pretty hard year in the West. Don't let your guard down yet. This is when leaves and pine needles start to accumulate on your roofs. So this is a very important time to be keeping up with that maintenance. And then some roofs actually have ridges on them. So in the image here on the right, you can see this would be an example of a metal roof or a tile roof, like a barrel tile roof, or sometimes even if you have a flat tile roof, the ridge on the top of your roof will actually have some spaces as that flat tile will go into cover that V. You want to make sure to block those spaces with a non-combustible material, such as a wool insulation product, because that's a common spot that an ember could lodge in and then ignite the sheathing or other roof decking material underneath. So what is the difference between these different roof classes? Again, Class A is what's recommended for fire safety. Examples of those are asphalt composition shingles or clay and cementitious tiles. Some types of metal roofs are Class A. Class B, they tend to be this is a long term here, exterior rated, pressure impregnated, fire retardant treated shake or shingle. If you live in the state of Nevada, these are not allowed in Nevada. So hopefully you don't have this type, but if you live in other parts of the United States, you may. And then Class C roofs, some examples of those are recycled plastic, rubber, and aluminum. So again, we recommend the Class A, but some Class B and C roofs can actually become Class A by assembly, which means that you can actually modify the components that are creating that overall roof to make them Class A and more resistant to fire. In the image here, you see an example where on the top you have a Class B or C roof, but the covering of the roof, so the shingles or whatever it is that you have there, and between the roof sheathing and the covering, you can add an additional fire-resistant layer. All of these types of assemblies are lined out in the manufacturer's instructions for the roofing materials. So if you do go down that route, we suggest that you closely follow the instructions laid out that the manufacturer provided. At roof-to-wall intersections, this is a very common place for debris to accumulate. So again, you want to make sure to clean those areas commonly, but you can also do things to reinforce that intersection to make it less vulnerable to fire, because this is a common spot that embers could lodge. And so, for example, you could replace a small strip of the siding where the roof to wall intersect with a non-combustible option like a cement board, which is non-combustible. And you can get cement boards that can match your siding to some degree. This is what we call a local replacement. So it's cheaper than replacing everything. Also, an even easier fix and even cheaper is just at the roof to wall intersection, install 6 inches of metal flashing along that roof to wall intersection like is pictured here. Then if an ember were to get lodged, you're going to have protection because there's going to be a non-combustible layer between that roofing material and the siding you have there. Rain gutters. This is a common culprit where embers can get in and ignite. It's very important to commonly clean your rain gutters out. Again, especially this time of year when trees start to lose their leaves and needles, you want to make sure to clean that out. There is something that you can actually add to the gutters, which is a non-combustible gutter cover device. As you can see in the picture here, it's like a screened cover on your gutters. That allows the debris to accumulate on the top, but less of it accumulates over time. You still need to routinely clean that surface and make sure to clean behind the device in case needles and leaves and other debris get lodged between the gutter and the actual edge of your roofing. Another thing that you can do is you can install a non-combustible and corrosion-resistant metal drip edge to provide protection for the combustible components of your roof edge. So What I mean by that is when the roof comes down and you have that roof slope that comes down and meets with the gutter, you can actually insert a metal flashing that will protect all of the exposed components of your roof. So if you imagine your roof edge, there's often sheathing and the roofing materials and the fascia board that attaches. All of that is completely combustible because that fascia, unless you have it made out of cement board or some other sort of non-combustible material, in general, it is made out of wood. And so behind the gutter, between the gutter and the roofing material, is a common place that embers can get lodged. So if you just, again, put a metal strip there, you're going to provide that additional protection so that it will be harder for an ember to ignite the roofing materials. Okay, so now moving down to the edges of the roof, often people have eaves on their homes, and oftentimes they look more like the image on the left, where you have an open eave with intake air vents to allow air to move into the attic, and then it'll move out in a different vent. This is a particularly vulnerable spot for embers to get into your attic. It's common that as a fire is approaching, kind of the way that your house is built, there'll be an updraft because these vents are designed to intake air into your attic to increase airflow. So they'll pull that air up and then embers can get in there. Now, certainly if you have vents here that look like this, we suggest you screen them, and I'll talk more about that on the next slide. But we ultimately recommend that you enclose your open eave to turn it into a soffitted eave. So on the right-hand side here, you see that this open eave was enclosed with either your siding or plywood or any type of material that you would choose. I would recommend the siding to match your home. But you still want to allow air to intake, so you would want to install a strip vent. So as you can see here on the right-hand side, the soffitted eave has a strip vent on the outside edge of the eave that's still allowing air to pass through to get into the attic. Now again, this vent needs to be screened. So more about vents here, because that was introduced on the last slide. Vents are one of the easiest and cheapest things you can retrofit in your home. There are vents all over the crawl space and the attic. You've got the gable end vents. You've got the burr hole vents that I just showed. So there's a lot of different places that airflow is happening in your home, which you want. However, you want to make sure that those vents are not a weak point in your home. So there's a few things that you can do. You can avoid storing combustible items near the attic or crawl space vents. Some folks use their attics and crawl spaces to store old newspapers or books or clothing. Just make sure to store those things as far away from the vents as you possibly can. It's common to kind of stack your things on the edge of the walls. It might be best to put them more towards the center of the room, especially in fire season. For all of your vents, we recommend you add 1/8 inch non-combustible, corrosion-resistant metal mesh screening. Now, it's very important to note this non-combustible term here. On a workshop I gave a few months back about this exact topic, somebody wrote in the chat box that they went to Home Depot and bought mesh screening that turns out it was actually combustible. So a quick search on Google should be able to yield for you several options of 1/8 inch non-combustible screening. And if you ask folks at the hardware store where the non-combustible options are, they can let you know. Also, once you do this, we recommend that you should be inspecting your vent screens annually to make sure they're in good shape. You want to look for tears or holes in the screens because they're not going to do their job if there's a hole that's larger than that 1/8 inch size. And I'll note here, an added benefit of putting the screening on your vents is it'll also keep rodents out of your crawl space and birds out of your attic. That's definitely something we deal with in the high desert. where there are just mice everywhere. And so the screens certainly help keep them out of the crawl space. Okay, moving on to siding. So siding is definitely tends to be a combustible part of your home. We certainly recommend, if you're replacing your siding or if you are building a new home, that you use a non-combustible option. Two great options are stucco and cement board. So I own two homes. I own one in the high desert that is a stucco home, and then I own one in Tahoe that is a classic T111 wooden dug first siding. And so we kind of deal with the defensible space in both in different ways, and how to deal with our home because our siding is so different. But again, if you can choose a non-combustible siding such as stucco and cement board, that is what we recommend. However, if you have wooden siding, there are a few things that you can do. For example, if homes are very close together, which we say less than 30 feet separation between your home and your neighbor's home, you can use what's called a 1 hour construction. So it's a special type of wall assembly that has passed a fire test. An example here that's listed is a type X gypsum board, which, as a lot of people know, gypsum board is what your drywall in your home is made out of. But you could also consider replacing that entire side with a local replacement using non-combustible siding. So you could say, okay, I'm going to do an accent wall that's right next to my neighbors. I'm going to do that in cement board. That's going to be a little bit different than the rest of the house, but it'll be cheaper than replacing all of it. And then an important note is you really want to ensure that the bottom 6 inches of your house are non-combustible. Most homes have an exposed concrete foundation around the exterior of their home, but I have seen from time to time where people have covered that up with siding. We would recommend that you peel that back and that you leave that 6 inches of the concrete foundation exposed on the bottom of your home. It's really works well and is effective if you, again, have that 0 to 5 feet non-combustible zone on the ground right next to that concrete foundation, right? So you have the gravel ground that meets your foundation. That's going to really create a very good zone around your home. So moving into skylights and windows, a lot of homes have skylights. There are 2 different types. As you see here in the image, on the left, there is a plastic domed skylight. That's actually what I have on my home. And then on the right, there are flat glass skylights. And so in general, on sloped roofs, which are most roofs, I think in some cases there are flat roofs out there, but most people's roofs are sloped. We recommend glass skylights. The plastic skylights can melt easier, and so they're just not as safe if a fire is approaching. And then certainly debris can accumulate around the skylights at all of the edges where they meet your roof, and the edges themselves where they open and close, if that's an option for yours. So it's important to remove debris around those often. And then if a wildfire is approaching, you want to be sure to close the skylights. And then if you have a skylight that is operable, so one that does open, like the one on the right here, the flat one, you want to make sure to screen that. So have a screen there, because just in case a fire is approaching and you're not home, or it's the middle of the night, you don't have time to close everything, that screen is really going to provide that first line of defense for embers to enter into the home. So moving on to windows. And so on the left here is a diagram that's kind of technical, but I like it because it explains what heat does to your window. So on the left here, you have the outside of the home, and on the right is the inside of the home, and the window is kind of right in the middle. And on the left, we have these arrows coming showing radiant heat is being exposed to the window. And it shows that thermal stress of that radiant heat being exposed to the window causes it to expand and crack. And so this just re-emphasizes the point that you really don't want vegetation under your windows. You really want to have that 0 to 5 foot non-combustible zone around your house so that you're reducing the heating of your windows. It also shows why multi-pane windows with tempered glass really are the best option. Because if you have more than one pane, that thermal stress has to happen to both panes, or sometimes triple pane windows exist. So all 3 of those panes. And so if you have to replace your windows, we certainly recommend multi-pane windows are the best choice. Also, if a neighbor is within 30 feet of your home, so again, that's kind of our threshold of that's a close neighbor, you'd want to consider installing a non-combustible shutter on that side of the house, because there's going to be more radiant heat if your neighbor's home is on fire that could compromise your windows. And so you could deploy the shutters before you evacuate if it was safe to do so and you had enough time. All windows that can open should have screens installed on them. So you want to make sure that, you know, those screens really provide that first line of defense for embers. Once they ignite, they burn really quickly and they're gone, but having that that screen is going to help out a little bit. And then of course, close windows when wildfire is threatening. Okay, moving on to attached decks. Decks are a really vulnerable part of your home, and there's a couple of simple steps that you can do if you have a wooden deck attached to your home. So first of all, you want to extend that rule of the 0 to 5 foot non-combustible zone to include your deck. So surrounding your deck should be 0 to 5 feet non-combustible. As you can see in the diagram here, we have gravel under the deck and extending outside of it. You also want to make sure underneath your deck is a non-combustible zone also. So you don't want to store lumber or deck furniture or a wooden canoe, anything that is combustible. You don't want to store anything like that under your deck. If your deck overhangs a slope, so if your house is on a steep slope and there's trees and such underneath, you want to make sure to create good defensible space downslope of the deck. So if a fire is racing uphill, it's not going to run into a bunch of trees right next to your deck that are going to shoot flames under your deck. You want to increase the size of the gap between the deck boards to 1/4 of an inch so that debris can fall through the boards. The big thing is you don't want debris to get lodged between the boards, and then an ember can go in there and ignite your whole deck with the debris that is in there. And so you also want to routinely clean underneath the deck to capture all the debris that's falling through. If you are building a new deck, obviously we would recommend a non-combustible decking material, including steel joists. That is an expensive option, but if you want to build a brand new deck, we would recommend considering that. And then if a fire is threatening, you want to move your combustible furniture into the house or off of your deck entirely. So this is a great low cost option to do if you have a wooden deck, it's attached to your home, you're not planning to build a new one, is to consider replacing the deck board that's closest to your home. So you can see that here in the image on the left, where there's a gray strip running all along the house. That's an example where someone has replaced that board closest to your home with a non-combustible option. The option that I like to recommend is actually you could put a grate in there. So if you live somewhere with snow, if snow is accumulating on your home, there's a lot of moisture that's up against your siding, and you can actually alleviate that by having a grate right there where you would get that actual snow melt leaving the deck, and then also it's a non-combustible option. Another thing that we recommend is that you install flashing between the ledger board and the joist to reduce ember intrusion. And so as you can see here on the image on the right, the ledger board is light brown and the joist is tan. You should have metal flashing that extends between the ledger board and the joist and up 6 inches above that. Again, that's an example of where these intersections are spots where embers can easily lodge. And so the flashing would provide an additional layer of protection in that vulnerable joint. Okay, your garage, quick notes here. You want to include your garage in your defensible space planning. You want to make sure, so that means that there should be a 0 to 5 foot non-combustible zone around your garage, just like any other part of your home. You should make sure the space between the garage doors and the framing is well sealed so that embers can't lodge their way in there and then get into the garage. Windows and vents in your garage should follow all of the same recommendations I already provided about, having to be double paned, screening the vents, closing if a fire is approaching. And then again, you want to make sure your garage doors are closed if a wildfire is threatening. Getting close to the end here, folks, chimneys. So this is just another example. If you have an actual chimney box, some people just have a stovepipe out of their roof. In my primary house, I have a stovepipe out of my roof. In my rental, I have stovepipe out of a chimney. So I have both options. The metal flashing is important to include, as you see here in the image, where that chimney box meets the roof. Because again, it's those roof to wall or roof to chimney box or deck to siding. It's any of those intersections that are very vulnerable to ember intrusion. So you want to just add that additional layer of protection by adding the metal flashing. Your stovepipe, you should cover from your chimney or your stovepipe with a non-combustible screen. So we recommend you use a metal screening with openings between 3/8 of an inch and a 1/2 inch. And then in the summertime and in the fall, when you're not using your wood stove, or your chimney, you should be sure to close the flue so that it's more sealed in case there are embers flying and trying to enter the top of your chimney or stovepipe. So your fence. This is often a highly combustible piece of material surrounding your property. A lot of people have wooden fences, and fences are incredibly expensive to build. I know this because my husband is constantly telling me he's not going to fence our property because it's too expensive. So an easy fix is to just replace the combustible portion closest to your home with a non-combustible section. So here we have in this image, the 5 feet between the wall, between your siding and your gate is non-combustible. And then in this image, we also have a non-combustible gate. So we've actually given ourselves about 10 feet here, but an easy fix is just the 5 feet that are attached to your home should be non-combustible. And then of course, like anything else, don't let debris accumulate at the edge of your fence, and don't use your fence as a trellis for plants. That happens often, and that's a little bit of just an easy way for direct flames to impinge on your deck and then move straight to your home. So that is the download of all of the tips that we have of how to harden your home. And so now I'm curious, what do folks think is the most vulnerable part of your home after listening to this talk? So if you could launch that poll, Megan, that'd be great. Are you there, Megan?
Oh, yeah, sorry. It says it's launching. Okay. It has an error. I'm going to try again. Okay, there we go.
So now which part of your home do you think is most vulnerable? Vents is still the winner. Oh, deck is taking a bit of a lead. Definitely looks like folks are still leaning towards vents, but there's a bit of a jump in decks. So people are seeing, okay, there's a bit of a change in how I'm thinking about my deck. So I'm going to go ahead and end the polling and share the results here. And as you can see, some folks certainly, there was some increase in what folks think about their deck, which is an important piece. So I'm going to stop that share, and then I just have 2 more slides here just to wrap this up before we move into questions. And so every time I do a poll, I have to reshare. So sorry about that. So just to leave you folks with a quick checklist, I'm not going to go over all of this, but it will be included in the slides of kind of what we recommend are some of the top things that you can do. And so again, we want you to think about your defensible space in these 3 different zones. Non-combustible is particularly important in terms of home hardening. With your roof, you really want to think about your roof assembly. Is it a class A, class B, class C, and go from there. You want to keep the roof clean. And your gutters have to stay clean, and you could install a device to make that easier. Keep up with the skylights, keeping those clean. On your exterior walls, you can enclose your open eaves and turn them into soffitted eave. Make sure you have that 0 to 6 inch non-combustible zone between the siding and the ground on the bottom of your home, and ensure all your windows are multiple pane and have screens. All of your vents should be covered with screen, and you should inspect them annually for tears or damage. And then with your deck, you can install metal flashing between the deck ledger board and the joist. If you have a combustible fence, replace that 5 feet closest to the home, and make sure your garages are well sealed. So this is just a quick little checklist of what you can do quickly around your home. And with that, I want to conclude to say all of this information is about to come out in a publication called the Tahoe Home Retrofit Guide. Now, even though we made this guide specifically for Tahoe because it was connected to a grant we had for some work there, these tips are applicable to folks all over the United States. And so it's always important to check on what the building codes and things like that are in your state if you're going to build new construction. But certainly these tips and guides can apply to you wherever you are. This project was a joint effort between University of Nevada Cooperative Extension, University of California Cooperative Extension, the Tahoe Resource Conservation District, Cal Fire, Living with Fire, Tahoe Fire and Fuels Team, the Tahoe Network of Fire Adaptive Communities, and was funded by the California Climate Investments Program. So with that, I put up a little bit of information about here. You can email me at restanoc@unr.edu. You can look for more information on livingwithfire.com and send any questions to lwf@unr.edu. And that's it for me.
Cool.
Great presentation. I love those graphics. They're so beautiful. So we actually got a few questions, and I'm going to pull those up. Okay. Marilyn is asking for just a list of workers or contractors that understand these home retrofit requirements. She says, I find over and over again that she has to tell these folks that proposed materials are not appropriate for living in a very high fire hazard area.
Yeah, that's a great point, Marilyn. I'm curious where you live, if you're in the Northern Nevada area. I will say that we, our group that made this publication with the recommendations, we are putting on a contractor and building professional training with this information in November. And maybe something that I'll ask them is if they want their names to be available if folks have ideas about this. That also gives me an idea of maybe Living with Fire can provide some trainings For example, another thing that UNR Extension does is there's this thing called the QUEL training, which is the water efficient landscapers training. So landscapers can get certified through Extension to have the information to do more water efficient landscaping at your house. That could be something our program could do for actual contractors to know what are the retrofitting suggestions. So that gives me several ideas of how to get this word out there more. But I will say we are putting on a training in November for engineers, architects, and contractors, everyone that's involved in the building profession. So hopefully that'll start getting the word out.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that. I think that it would, I think I have to mention, because we're with the university, we can't recommend one company over another. But if we offer this training to contractors or other people, and then maybe we can just put, hey, a list of their names, like, hey, these individuals went through this training, so they understand the requirements on our website. I think that would be a really cool idea.
Yeah.
So great idea.
Hey, before we move on, I just wanted to mention Marilyn did reply in the Q&A box and says she lives in San Francisco.
Okay, gotcha. If you email lwf@unr.edu, I can connect you with Steve Quarles, who is a esteemed expert in this and who helped me a lot with this project. And he lives in Marin, and he's connected to all home construction people there in this topic. So he might be able to provide you with a list of folks in your region, in the Bay Area.
Okay, I'm typing that response to her now with your email.
Okay.
Second question. Somebody's asking, what about solar roof tiles?
That's a really good question that never came up in this project that we were working on. I would imagine solar roof tiles would be relatively resistant to fire. But I'm going to do a little bit of research on that because that never came up in our whole talks on this year-long project. So I'll send out the answer to that with the email that we send out with the slides and all that.
I would also guess that if you have solar, like solar panels on your roof, could any dried vegetation like pine needles or leaves get lodged underneath there? I don't know.
I would think that they should be cleaned just like a skylight or something like that. But this person, I think, is specifically, there is a new roofing material that Tesla is coming out with. That's your tiles for your roof are little solar panels. It's cool. Not like solar panels on top of your roof covering. It's like the roof covering is solar panels.
Yeah. Good question.
So cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to have that be my roof.
I know, right? Me too. Stephanie has a question. She has, we have stucco, but some of it is chipping off. Should we have this replaced as soon as possible?
I think it probably depends on how chipped off your stucco is. I know that you can repair your stucco. So that's probably the easiest thing to do and probably make the house look better anyways. But for fire resistance, you want to avoid anything that has, gaps, cracks, anything, because that's just where your debris can get lodged and embers can get lodged. But I don't think you would need to replace your stucco. I think you could probably repair your stucco. And that would be the best option for it. And then you could choose a new color of your stucco. That's the thing about stucco is you're kind of stuck with the color.
Here's another question. What about engineered ember-proof vents, like engineered by Brandguard, Vulcan, or Ember Out?
Yep, those are recommended vents. If you want to replace them all, definitely Vulcan comes up a lot as a trusted resource, and those are things that we do recommend doing. But that's an overhaul replacement as opposed to just being able to screen them, but they will provide you significantly more protection than just screens alone.
I would guess they would definitely probably cost a lot more than doing the 1/8 inch wire mesh.
Exactly. But some people have the resources and want to put the best foot forward for their home. And so that is absolutely an excellent option.
Yeah. Jane says, is there any fire resistant paint for wood siding?
So great question. There are paints that purport to be resistant to fire, that they're called fire retardant coatings. We do not recommend using those. If you live in Nevada, I believe that you aren't allowed to use them. They're not part of the building code in Nevada. However, the reason that we really recommend not using them is that they don't last very long. And so they don't do well with exposure to the elements like sun and snow and moisture. So within 3 to 5 years, the fire resistance in them is gone. And then, so you've spent a lot of money to paint your home in something that's ultimately not going to protect your home. And so they degrade easily and quickly. And so the experts do not recommend using them.
We have a ton of questions, so we're going to try to answer everybody's questions. And I do have to mention, if we don't end up getting to your question, please email us at lwf@unr.edu. Another question, for multi-story houses, would your recommended shutters on all windows, or would you recommend shutters on all windows or just the first floor?
Both floors, because the idea is that you're trying to protect flames or radiant heat or embers from those. And if you have like trees, for example, it'll depend on the landscape, right? If you have tall pine trees all around your home that are around that second story, or you have other second story homes around your home, right, then you would want them on the second story. But if all of the vegetation is really low, you might be able to get away with just that bottom story.
Another question, should you stain your fence?
Staining your fence, I think, is separate from the fire issue. I mean, a lot of stains are quite flammable. So that's a piece to that too, right? Is that the stains themselves can be rather flammable, but the wood itself is quite flammable. So I feel like staining or not staining, it's still a flammable part of your property that needs to be treated in different ways in terms of, replace the 5 feet closest to your home, get the vegetation out from that's attached to the deck or surrounding the deck entirely, clean the debris from around the deck.
I agree that making sure that you have a fence, that connector to your house. So like 5 feet away. Another question, what do you think about the vulcanized vents or rooftop sprinkler systems?
I spoke about the vents earlier. Those are a great recommendation. I don't feel like I have the expertise to speak enough about the rooftop sprinkler systems. I will tell you that there have been cases when people have left sprinklers on in their yards and things like that, and then there's no water for the firefighters when they get there because it's all been used. And so, I'm not going to give a firm recommendation either way on that. I just say proceed with caution.
Okay, another question. Any opinions on the fancy vents with materials that swell and close the holes when exposed to heat? Nice but excessive, useful or not?
I don't know enough about that to give an intelligent response. I don't know about vents that close and open with heat, so I need to do a little bit more research on that.
I know that they are available and some people prefer to do it. And it is a little bit more expensive than the 1/8-inch wire mesh. So it's kind of up to you. Let's see. What about plastic deck boards versus wood?
So plastic can still be combustible and can melt. So there are actual types of deck boards out there that are fire tested that you can choose that are a non-combustible option. So I would talk specifically with folks at your hardware stores where you can order these, or do some research online. There are several options. As far as wooden decks go, hardwood decks are better than softwood decks. So something like IPE is a hardwood that folks use for decks versus a redwood deck, which is a very soft wood and is very combustible. So if you want to do wood, a hardwood is better, but even better is a non-combustible decking product.
Okay, I have to only do one more question because we got to get to this poll. So again, I apologize if we didn't get to your question. Please email us at lwf@unr.edu and we will answer that question. Last question.
And Jamie, after this question, why don't you put the poll up and people can answer it while I answer another question?
Good idea. Do you have the research reference on screen size for the chimney? I hear exclusively with wood, have spoken with chimney sweeps, and often the screen creates more problems with clogging and fire issues. I can understand protecting embers from your fireplace landing on the roof. Has IBHS recently done testing on this?
So I got that recommendation from an expert from IBHS, but I will put a note here that we need a little bit more information about that. Who's asking this question, if you'll directly email us at lwf@unr.edu, and then we'll have your information, and then I can get you that research. Because it came directly from an IBHS official that said that.
Okay, I'm gonna launch this poll.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Just launch this poll. So we just really would like you to answer these polls, what you learned, if you plan on implementing anything. And then there's a demographics reporting part too.
It really helps us understand if we're doing the right things. So if you could just take a minute to answer the questions, that would be great. But I can keep answering questions, Jamie.
So Stephanie has a question. I have a raised bed garden on the side of my house, but it's within 5 feet of the house. Should this be moved?
Yes, because that would be if it's made out of wood, it should be moved. My husband and I recently were going to put raised beds on the side of our house, and we decided they're combustible. We're going to move them far away from the house and have the garden be far away from the house because all the fencing and everything is too combustible. It makes us too nervous.
Bill has a question. Is there any consideration for external fire protection systems? So probably like the sprinklers on the roofs.
Yeah, again, I'm not really an expert on that, and I need to do some more research about those. So I'm not going to provide an intelligent answer to that.
Somebody said, should storing non-combustible material items be avoided near all openings, windows, skylights, or is it more important inside vents specifically? No,
I think around all openings of the house, you should make sure that you're not, one of the things we recommend if you're evacuating is you actually move all the furniture to the inside, like push it all to the center of the house so that you don't have a wooden table right under the window. Obviously, we all have our furniture all around all of the windows and things like that. So we can only do our best.
And then this person also asked, is fence height significant at all in how vulnerable the fence is to wildfire?
Well, that's a good question. And I would say that it would depend on what your surrounding vegetation is and how far the fence is from your house. So you have to think if flames and wind are approaching your home, the flame lengths that are going to come off of your fence, right, are going to be a function of how tall that fence is. And then you have to think the wind's going to be turning those flames on their side. So if your fence is 10 feet from your deck or your house, that's going to pretty quickly push the flames onto your home. But if your fence is 50 feet from your house, having it be taller probably won't be as big of a deal. So you really want to think about what this whole situation is. How far is the fence from your deck? How far is the fence from your house? How far is the fence from other vegetation? Things like that.
Is there a slope?
Is there a slope? Exactly. Because on a slope, it's important to remember that fires run quicker uphill, and especially if they have a steeper slope, right? So they're going to be moving uphill and those flames are going to be pushing down against the hill. So they always say that fire moves quicker uphill because the flames are laying down a little bit and preheating all the fuel in front of them. And so you really want to consider your decks and your fences and stuff if you're on a steep hill like that.
I haven't gotten any other questions, and it is
Perfect.
12:30 right now. I think that everybody has voted. Voting has slowed down. So I really want to say thank you to Christina for this information-rich and important presentation. And thank you to attendees for attending our series here in September. Again, I just want to reiterate that we will be sending out Christina's slides, and we will be sending out the YouTube link, especially when all these are posted. So again, if you have any other questions, email us lwf@unr.edu.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, and I went ahead and saved the polls. So
you are awesome, Megan.
We can end. So I'm going to go ahead and end the workshop. See you
Cool.
guys later.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.